Hi again, folks. Back here with another topic. And this topic is going to be something I've touched on kind of in passing in some of my other videos. But yesterday, someone put up a post on Facebook, and it was not news. A lot of people are aware of it now, but it's actually, even when people became aware of it because of a CNN story a couple of years ago, um, even then, it was really not news for people who were aware of what goes on in this area of the world. And that is, the person put up a picture of people held against their will in parts of northwestern Africa. And it was a story about modern day slavery. Now, I am of the belief, because again, I follow this stuff, that it's not exactly something new. It's just an ongoing thing that has been going on for centuries in that region of the world. But let me point out right off the top, for those who may come in here and say, well, it's not just Africa. Of course, I know it's not just Africa. Slavery is going on all around this world, even in America, even in Europe. It still goes on. Maybe played out in different ways, but it still goes on. And a lot of these people that we are seeing in northwestern Africa that find themselves caught up in this whole trade that is going on, it's happening in a different way. Now, I don't know if this is what happened two, three, 400 years ago in Western Africa, from places like Nigeria, modern day Benin, Ghana, Angola, Cameroon. That was what they used to call the slave coast. I don't know if that is what exactly is going on, but what is happening here, I am sure, is that there are people who are coming up from sub-Sahara Africa, which, believe it or not, has some amazingly beautiful places, has some affluent places. Um, there's still areas there where people are struggling and people are suffering. There's still slums where people are looking for a better life. And these people are susceptible to people coming to them and selling them a pipe dream by telling them, hey, look, come with me, pay me a certain amount of money, and I can get you into Spain. I can get you into Portugal. I can get you into Greece. I can get you into Italy. I can get you into Switzerland, where you can go live a better life, where you can do better. And they've probably heard the stories or seen it with some who have gone and are doing better, have their children. They're probably looking at a guy like Giannis, can't even pronounce his name, the basketball player for the Milwaukee Bucks, who is of African descent, but is now an NBA player who was born in Greece or Switzerland. I think Greece, actually. So they see stories like that, and you know how it is. Everyone thinks they can basically replicate the same thing in their lives. So I'm sure these people are lured by these dreams. And then next thing you know, they travel through some underground railroad out there, and they end up in a place like Libya, or a place like Tunisia, or a place like Morocco, and find out that it's not what they thought it was going to be. And the next thing you know, whoever lured them to that area now has the keys to their freedom or their movements. And thus, they find themselves caught up in something that would be considered slavery. Now, some of these people do make it. And again, what I'm speaking about here in Africa happens in other parts of the world too. Even in my own Caribbean islands. And how this works is, now you make it to where you were told you were going to make it. You've made it to Spain, you've made it to Italy, you've made it to Greece, you've made it to Switzerland, you've made it to France. Now you're there. And the next thing you know, you find out you have to pay the piper. The person who funded your trip, the person who brought you to where you were. Now you realize you have to pay them back. And in some cases, when it comes to women, they have to now prostitute themselves. They now find themselves working in a brothel. And that's the way. Now they're working for a pimp, basically. For the men, they find themselves over there and they may have to engage themselves in criminal activity or do certain things to make sure they pay back who brought them over. And now they are enslaved. Not to mention the fact that they may end up in the home of someone where they're now a gardener, they're now a nanny or whatever, and they're there illegally. And these people can take advantage of them. That happens here in this country, in the United States. This happens where I come from, in the Virgin Islands, where there are people from the Dominican Republic or even Haiti, but more so the Dominican Republic, who find themselves on our island. And now they probably have to pay someone back. And the next thing you know, they're working in a brothel somewhere to pay back their fee. So it goes on in different places. But the reason why I brought up Africa and the reason why I brought up Northwestern Africa is tied to something else. One of the narratives that you hear from white supremacists, racists, Nazis, whoever, or maybe just white people in general, it's that, hey, you guys are blaming us for slavery. You guys are blaming my ancestors for slavery. But your people had something to do with it. Your people was complicit in the African slave trade. Africans sold Africans. And for us as a lot of black folks, we don't want to hear that narrative. We don't want to believe that's true. People like the Hebrew Israelites that I've spoken about on here, one way they get around it is by saying, well, yeah, you know what? Africans did enslave other Africans. But the Africans they enslaved were not really Africans. They were Israelites who happened to be living in Africa, who happened to have been born in Africa. But they're not like the other Africans over there. Those Africans over there are Hamites. And those Hamites enslaved us, or captured us and sold us to the white man. So we have nothing to do with them. It's those Africans over there. Of course, white folks don't care and don't know about all of that, and don't go down that road and try to find out which African is different from which African and who's an Israelite and who isn't and so forth. They just see black skin, black people, and they just happen to know that black folks over there captured other black folks and sold them to the white man. This in no way excuses white folks and their part in this. Again, I'm not talking about all white people, mind you, okay? I hate to have to say that I have to use the word some and not all, because people are going to think I mean every last one of them. No. But yes, it does not excuse the European countries or the Americans who engage in the slave trade, who willingly and gleefully took human beings against their will and chained them in boats and brought them over to the side of the world to provide free labor to them. It does not excuse them. But when they make that statement, they're actually correct, because there are parts of Africa. There were African groups of people, some people say tribes, who did engage in slave raiding. And one of the places where they did this was in the former kingdom of Dahomey, which is today known as Benin. And there were slave raiding campaigns where there were Africans, there were kings who realized, wow, I can make a decent living, or I can live as a very wealthy man if I go inland, capture other Africans, drag them back to the coast in chains, and sell them to the white man. It's just a reality of what happened. Again, doesn't mean all Africans were involved in this. Doesn't mean that all African tribes or all African kings were in this, because there are cases where some of them resisted heavily. But the Europeans showed up on the seashore, built their forts. They were not stupid enough to talk about they're going to go wandering into the wilderness, not knowing what's out there, to try to grab anybody. I'm not saying they may not have sent out a person or two along with these African kings to basically survey what they can get out of this. But for the most part, that was not what they did. They had their middlemen who went in and did their dirty work and brought their cargo to the coastline. And in trade, they gave them guns, liquor, money, whatever it is. And the Europeans gladly took the human cargo across the Atlantic Ocean and brought them to this side of the world. And how do we know that this is true? Because in the country of Benin today, there are actual groups in Benin who recognize, who realize, who knows within their family history, they participated in the slave trade. They were complicit with the Europeans and the Americans to funnel slaves or enslaved Africans to this side of the world. Those groups over there today are apologizing to other people in parts of Benin or the former kingdom of Dahomey, apologizing to other groups for their part in enslaving their ancestors. In fact, there was a leader from from Benin, who came over to the United States some years back. I don't know if it was Philadelphia or Baltimore or Washington, D.C. I'm not quite sure. Some one of those cities. And he stood before a congregation of African Americans, people he's never met. And he apologized on behalf of his country for their role in the slave trade. Why is he doing that? If that was not the case. If I'm remembering the story somewhat correctly, there was a man, he was from Brazil. If I'm not mistaken, I think he was an enslaved person, or he was born in Brazil to enslaved parents. And he somehow founded his way. I think his name was D'Souza. And he founded his way, or he ended up back in Western Africa. I don't remember what modern day country, but I think it was Benin. He ended up back over there. And having some knowledge of Brazil, and now having a knowledge of Africa, and knowing how things operated, he got into the slave trading business. And I believe that family, the D'Souza family, were very instrumental in making sure that slave raiding and slave trading was going back and forth and running like a fine oiled machine. If I am not mistaken, it's his family or his descendants that I think still do pretty well in Benin, that still runs a lot of things in Benin. I believe it's out of their group that has apologized to other people in Benin for their family's part in the slave trade. So when I saw the picture yesterday, I happened to notice some things haven't changed. I am not seeing any white people in between there holding Africans against their will. What I see are other black Africans. Now, needless to say, they may be of a different faith. Because in that portion of Africa, Northern Africa, a lot of the people there, they may look like me, they may have my complexion and everything, but they generally are Muslim, number one. And number two, they generally tend to associate more with the Arabs of course, Northern Africa and the Middle East more than they are with the people in sub-Saharan Africa. It's almost like two different Africas, Two Africas, I should say. A type of Africa above the Sahara and another one below the Sahara, where there may not be allegiance between the two groups. Because religion-wise, they tend to be gulfs apart, even though you have a large Muslim population in places like Nigeria. But a lot of people south of the Sahara are Christians, or they still adhere to their ancestral religions, whereby the people in Northern Africa tend to be more Muslims. And that always did play a role in the dynamics of slavery between the two groups. And it seems like it's still going on. Not it seems, it's still going on to this very day. And it's something to keep in mind. So, yes, there is truth to the fact, and it's still happening today if you ever denied it, that Africans are enslaving other Africans. I shouldn't say enslaving, but holding them against their will and then selling them off to whoever can come up with the money, or selling them off to customers, to buyers, who sometimes may remain faceless in today's world. Sure, you're not going to go to Greece and see a plantation and see a bunch of people out there slaving with people walking around with whips and beating them and everything. Things have changed, but it's probably still happening there in broad daylight, just in a different way, where the threat is, you know what, I will call the authorities on you. Do what I say, do what I want you to do, or else. Or it's, I'll give you a certain amount of money to do this backbreaking work, to feed your family back in Africa, or to take care of yourself, but you would never ever get the amount of money that you deserve for the work that you do. Still some form of modern day slavery. But the fact that Africans are still engaging in this, it's a sad fact. I don't know if it will ever change, because there will always be people who are greedy for that money, who are looking out for their own selves and their own self-preservation. But it was just a thought that came across my mind, and I figured I'd just create a video about it. I don't know what you can take from this. I don't know what you can elaborate on, or what you can question, or whatever the case might be. But if you can, or if you do, feel free to drop it down in the comments. Feel free to share it with your friends. Let's discuss the matter. Okay? All right, this is a relatively short video for what I normally do, but I'll just leave it out there for you guys to watch and tell me what you think, okay? You guys take care.